This deck tech is brought to you by Rippin' Dots, the ice cream of the high seas, found in all of your local amusement parks that are solely pirate themed. Thank you for sponsoring this deck tech. Rippin' Dots. Sea. Ice cream. Go. All right, buds, welcome to a deck tech by yours truly, Tommy Fresh of Fresh and Buds podcast, the hit podcast, the biggest podcast in the world. As you know, many people have said, I think GQ wrote that. And we have a really cool deck tech. I went 6-2 with Riptide at the 10K Brawl the other weekend in Columbus, Ohio, put on by the Realm Games. And the people want to know, how do I take Riptide to a top 16 finish for 225 smackaroos? The people want to know, how do I make that kind of cash, that cold hard cash? Well, I'm going to explain the deck. The deck's pretty cool. Riptide, as we know, is a hero. He actually looks a lot like this and has two different abilities. And the two abilities are, well, if a trap triggers on an attack that your opponent is throwing at you, you deal 1 damage, which is hard to prevent, I will say. And also, when you play a card from hand, you may put a card from hand face down into the arsenal, as long as the arsenal is empty, of course. And that is a really, really powerful effect, and we will explain why in the deck tech. But yeah, I wanted to get on here because a lot of people were asking for a little bit of a deck tech, so I want to talk about it and kind of go through my thought processes. This is not a very original deck. I've worked on something similar to this with Jesse Harper, and very, very not stock, but there's some spice going on. But I want to talk more about what the cards are in the deck, and then also my thought processes when I look at each card, right? The different kind of lines, how I see it kind of flowing. The deck is interesting because it's very aggro, but also can kind of take a step back and end up being more in the mid-range control-y thing to kind of play for an end game, which is really, really unique about Riptide and is a lot of fun. So if you enjoy it, please do subscribe, drop a comment, like the video, share it, do all that fun stuff. It is all very helpful. And check out Fresh and Buds, a podcast that I do. And I'll mention all of this at the end of the video as well. But in case you don't make it that far, because you're like, wow, these cards are too powerful, I can't keep watching. It makes me scared. You can check out all of that. They got links in the bio. The deck list is also in the bio or show notes or whatever. And it's a everything's available. Buds Discord, Fresh and Buds, all of it. It's all for you. But you know what else is for you, folks? This deck tech. Let's go. Let's talk about the equipment suite here. So this is what you see is what you get. You're playing all of these cards in every single matchup because the sideboard's pretty jammed, and we're just making use of what we have in the equipment slots. So, which is going to be 6, right? You have your full equipment suite. You're going to have your weapon, which I'm going to talk about, and then a quiver. The weapon is Dreadbore, which has the awesome text that says arrows you control have defense reactions can't be played from hand. This chain link. This is a great way to kind of jam up your opponents if they're not expecting Dreadbore and they think, oh, it's a ranger, I'll just block out a lot, I'll use a lot of D-reacts. It makes it harder for them to do that. They have to play it from arsenal. It's just like a little bit of an edge you can gain because in reality, and we'll talk about it, Riptide doesn't really need a bow to load your stuff. So based on his hero ability. And but that being said, you can still load an arrow with Dreadbore if you need to, and all that says is it's a once per turn action. You pay 1 resource. You may put an arrow card from your hand face up into an empty arsenal zone you control. If you do, it gets +1 until end of turn, and then this has go again. This is the +1 is pretty important, as we will see with some cards that we play. And yeah, but that shouldn't happen too much, but it will happen throughout the game. But the most important thing about Dreadboard is the defense reaction clause. That is a static ability. It's always active on your arrows. So super cool card. Glad it's finally getting its time in the sun. It's from, Everfest. It took that long for it to kind of get some play here. But we do have quivers now. And we're going to, nice little Steve Argyle signed Quiver of Abyssal Depths, which is really, it's a 0 opportunity cost to play this card, right? Because quivers say you only need to have a bow and you need to be a ranger to be able to play it. You play as an offhand. And Quiver of Abyssal Depths is you pitch 3 resources and you can pop it to get 3 arrows of different names from your graveyard back into the deck. You shuffle up. Really, as I said, 0 opportunity cost to play this. The important thing is you can kind of put some important threats back into your deck, especially if the game's going long and your opponent's trying to fatigue you. It is your own little remembrance on a stick, which is pretty cool. And we also do play at least 1 remembrance in the sideboard, which we will talk about. But that is what that's for. That's all it is, and there are oftentimes a lot of matchups you won't even activate it, but it costs nothing to put it out there. So you throw it out there. You can look at the rustling leaves as well if you want to do something spicy, if you want to try to get a little bit more aggressive, but I prefer the Quiver of Abyssal Depths there. So now let's talk about, in my opinion, the most important equipment piece in this deck, and that is Trench of Sunken Treasure. This card is the reason to play Riptide. It's so weird, this card. It's not inherently powerful. It has 1 block with Blade Break. Sure, that's cool. It has Arcane Barrier 1 as well. That is also a bonus. And it has this really cool activated ability, which is a once per turn instant. You may put a face down card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck and gain a resource. So you can pitch your arsenal, essentially. And you might be asking, well, why is that important, Tommy? Well, Riptide is a very interesting deck in a way that you do get like some clunker hands, and you have to throw some stuff into your arsenal. And it's important to clear it away so you can get your arsenal back and then continue to like kind of fix these hands. And you can also like hide some information there, right? You can put something in arsenal. Maybe if it's an important trap for later in the game, and slip it back underneath. And it allows you to kind of have control over your hands in a way that this wouldn't work as well in other decks. I mean, we saw some play with it with Lexi, but well, Lexi's gone. I love Trench. It's going to fix so many awkward situations for Riptide. And, it's also nice because Command and Conquer's the thing. And sure, you're still going to take 6 damage if you don't block it at all. But you can save your card and throw it on the bottom and, make use of the resource too on your own turn. A common thing you will do on a slower hand is trench away an arsenal, activate Dreadboard, throw an arrow there with +1, fire that off, and maybe you blocked a little bit extra. So you do get a lot of value still out of a rough hand, or if you're facing down a pretty high tempo hand from your opponent. So love Trench, very important. I would advise not to block with it early. Block with it only out of necessity. And, because you will find that you will miss the Trench as soon as it's gone. The second most important piece of the puzzle here is a piece of the puzzle that we just got back, which is Bullseye Bracers, which is obviously was suspended when Lexi was around. It has Arcane Barrier 1, doesn't block for anything, but it has the wonderful action of destroying it. You may put a arrow card from your hand into the arsenal face up. It gets +1, and that has go again. So It doesn't, it can save you, right? You can use this in like dire straits, but really you want to just extend the turn, right? Because sometimes you won't have something to activate Riptide to put something into arsenal, right? So popping the Bullseye Bracers will enable you to extend the turn. We saw a lot with Lexi to a higher degree, but this is something that Riptide really needed, and it kind of sucked when we lost it. So Bullseye Bracer, still great, still awesome in this deck, and happy to have it back. In tandem with Bullseye Bracers, we do have Snapdragon Scalers, an old classic. This card is something that, hey, we'll see it soon. We have Endless Arrow in the deck. You can send Endless Arrow, give it go again, bring it back to hand if it hits. Bullseye Bracers, throw it back in, attack again for 5, and all of a sudden your opponent has to say, well, if I don't block this now, they're going to get a arsenal out of this. And also, I just lose 2 cards. So it's just like a lot of value to kind of have that little tandem right there. And you don't always have to do them together. Sometimes you're just going to see opportunities to pop Snapdragon Scalers in a situation where, like, oh, you know what? Like, if I give this go again, I can smack for something of higher value or even equal value as the thing that I'm giving go again. And my opponent is willing to take all this damage. Now's the time to kind of steal that life from them. So Snapdragon Scalers, great card, still a great card, always going to be a great card. And then finally, to round it out, Crown of Providence. I almost said Dominion. We're not quite doing Royal Riptide over here, but Crown of Providence, best headpiece in the game. Pretty clearly, blocks 2, has Blade Break. You can filter your hand or your arsenal, which is important in Riptide, as we talked about with Trench of Sunken Treasure. Just really important to kind of clear up these hands. So something you'll find as you play this deck is that the hands can be so powerful, when you're trying to be on the offensive, but they can also clunk up because we'll see it with the sideboard. You run some traps and stuff like that. And sometimes you don't have the cards to load something with Riptide. So having that kind of option, once a game, plus being able to block 2 is pretty incredible. Riptide plays a lot like Viserai in a way, right? Viserai needs non-attack, attack, non-attack, attack, or whatever. They need to kind of have that texture of hands. And Riptide does it better, to be honest, I think, because you can filter stuff with Trench, and you can also take a step back and block efficiently, but you can also filter with the Crown of Providence. So let's talk about the arrows that Riptide is using in this deck. Now, it is a Ranger, so we're going to use arrows, and, for good reason, right? Arrows, are very powerful. And the beautiful thing about Riptide is activated, or not activated ability, triggered ability. When you play something from hand, you can put something into arsenal face down. That means that you are getting these arrows at a higher rate than other Rangers are getting them at, right? So in other Ranger decks, you typically have to pay 1 to activate a bow to put it in, right? We can do that too with Dreadbore, but we can also do that with a 0-cost non-attack action from hand, or even like a Ravenous Rabble, which we will see later in the deck tech. So all of a sudden, these arrows that are a pretty good rate already are a little bit higher of a rate in terms of their cost with Riptide. So let's talk about the key ones first. I mean, they're all pretty key, but as we go through, we're going to explain what each of them does. Bolt and Shot. We're playing Bolt and Shot red and yellow. Pretty important to go wide, right? We've seen it in Lexi. We see it sometimes in Azalea. It is also a powerhouse in Riptide. We don't play the blues. We did before a certain card was in the game, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But the beautiful thing, if you even at the yellow, so they're a 3 attack, 3 block, and then we got 4 attack, 3 block, and then if their power is greater than their base, it gets go again and has on hit reload. At the base of yellow, when you Dreadbore, it's at least going to be 4, so it's going to have that nice break point. And then obviously the 4 on red is just great, especially with a lot of the pump cards that we're going to see later in the deck tech. So these are just great go wide arrows. really important. They block 3, which is great too. We don't have a lot of resources in this deck, so the yellows will come up sometimes if you actually really need to pitch for something. This is very red line, you'll see, but the yellows will come up from time to time. And if you have a 1-cost arrow and you had to block a little bit and kind of take a step back, you can kind of pitch the yellow to activate Dreadboard, put a 1-cost arrow in, and then attack for whatever amount of damage that will be. Bolton shots, classic Ranger arrow, continuing to be so in Riptide. And then after that, we want to go wide in this deck. That's why we're playing these Bolton shots. We're also playing Falcon Wing. Great. 0 for 3 go again. Certainly good. But also, you're going to pump it. It's a great card to Arsenal, too, to start a turn, right? Because it can be hard to get go again right away from Arsenal. So having Falcon Wing in there is great to kind of throw in there and then set up for a bigger turn. Obviously takes the pumps very well. It is a great card to Dreadboard as well. Comes in for 4 go again, a lot like the yellow Bolton shots. So this is just another go wide arrow. Great card, super awesome addition to the deck to really just make sure that we're getting as many attacks in as possible with like these really cool on hits that we'll see from the buffs. And then after that, we have some arrows that have on hits on their own. And one I want to talk about is Drill Shot. Great card from Dynasty. So we're playing the red Drill Shot. 0 for 4. Great stats right there. Blocks 3. And when it hits, you may put a -1 counter on an equipment that the opposing hero controls, which is great because guess what? We have a lot of on hits, and equipment tends to be the bane of on hits because you can cover up those breakpoints. So if you look at this, early game, right, Drill Shot ends up being a 0 for 5, right? 5 points of damage, right? 4 or 5 points of value, 4 damage plus the 1 on the equipment. Now later game is just going to be a 0 for 4 because they've usually used up all their equipment at that point. But that is, it doesn't matter. It's a 0 for 4 that when you play a buff, throw into Arsenal, it's going to come in for usually 7 in this deck. So, which is another great breakpoint. So Drill Shot, great arrow, continues to be great. I like it early game. Late game is fine, but early game is when you want to start firing off these arrows. And then looking at an arrow you almost want to play, it's good the whole game, but we have Searing Shot here. I like this later game. I don't mind blocking with it because we're going to be talking about Codex of Frailty a little bit. But this is basically Drill Shot, but instead of putting a -1 counter, you're going to make them lose a life. So this is like a 0 for 5, which is great. And that's basically what you want to look at it like. You can obviously use it early game, but where Drill Shot kind of doesn't suffer late game, it's just a little bit less impressive late game. Searing Shot's excellent late game because, it gets to the point where I really need to cover both this up because, I can't take 2 damage or whatever. I can't take 5 or 2. So Searing Shot, great role filler, great thing to get back from Codex of Frailty later in the game. And talking about another, classic card, I mentioned it already, Endless Arrow. Just great. 0 for 4. It's a great card to play. Even if you have to block with your whole hand, you have an Endless Arrow in Arsenal, it still feels good to present it and make them consider giving up 2 cards to make sure that you don't get another Arsenal. It has a lot of cool interactions. I mentioned the Bullseye Bracers, Go Again, and then being able to kind of also be like a mind game because sometimes you're going to get ponders in this like deck, and then they won't know if this hits. Like you get it back, and then you ponder. They won't know what you're going to Arsenal. So you get to hide a little bit of information. That's just like a nice little added bonus. Endless Arrow, though, still an all-star. It's maybe not the greatest early and mid game, but late game all of a sudden becomes really, really tough to deal with, and it's often going to be at least one of the targets off of Quiver, and then maybe sometimes your like Remembrance if you have to board that in. Endless Arrow, still awesome. 0 for 4. And then we're going to get to some one-cost arrows here. Remorseless, I remember when this card was like $60 each. I don't think it quite is anymore, but still great. 1 for 5, blocks 3. If it's put in face up, you get super Dreadbore, so they can't block. They can't do D-reacts from hand or arsenal. It doesn't come up as much in this deck, but if you are Dreadboring it in, it does come in face up, so that's worth noting. But the most important thing here is the on hit. If it hits a hero until the end of their next turn, whenever they play an action card, they lose a life. So incremental damage there. People are often afraid of letting this card hit. It adds up, right? If this is a 1 for 5 and it hits, and then they take a couple more on their turn, I think one for 6, 1 for 7 is great. So just keep that in mind. And it also has that little added bonus of sometimes having D-react evasion later in the game. And, with Codex of Frailty too, if you have one resource floating around, it often isn't a bad card to grab back and fire off for the end of the Codex of Frailty turns. So Remorseless, great card, still great. Love the art too. Obsessed with that art. And then our last one-cost arrow here is Infecting Shot. Another Outsiders, great common. 1 for 5, on hit, Blood Rot. This is just high damage, right? Kind of like Remorseless. You can if this comes in and hits, and then they have to take the Blood Rot, this is presenting 7 damage. Plus, if you're using buffs, or if you have to Blood Rot it, or not Blood Rot, Dreadbore it in, that's presenting like 8 total damage. Nice little Codex of Frailty finisher. It's a nice at the end game, and a lot of these one-shot arrows are just good blocks because you can kind of keep them in mind for the Codex of Frailty turns. And this one at the end of the game, right? They could block it all, or not block it all, but like they could block maybe some of it and still take a damage, and then they still have to face down the Blood Rot. Blood Rot's great that way. You kind of force them to either think about paying for it or trying to win the game sometimes before they have to pay for the Blood Rot, which, our deck does block quite well. And then the last arrow is an arrow I alluded to just a moment ago, is not Infecting Shot. That's what we just talked about, folks. Intoxicating Shot. The Riptide specialization coming out of the expansion slot of Bright Lights. God, I love this card. So blue, 0 for 4, 3 block. Love those stats. Those stats are way above rate. So what's the catch, Tommy? Well, when this hits a hero, they create a Courage and Quicken token, and Courage and Quicken tokens, when you attack with something, gets +1 from the Courage and go again from the Quicken. Well, you might be saying, well, that sounds like a bad deal. They'll just take that and have like a really great turn. Well, we happen to have traps that care about both having higher attack value than their base and having go again. So this will often fill the slot of blocking and then maybe pitching and getting towards the end of the game where they might be tempted to take the damage to get the Quicken and Courage, and then all of a sudden your traps are online. You didn't use them as early as they might have thought, and all of a sudden they might be staring down some really powerful triggered abilities from the D-react traps that you'll be playing, and could lose just from the 1 damage from Riptide's other ability. So I love the design on Intoxicating Shot, and it's been a great addition to the deck. This used to be the blue Bolton shots prior to Bright Lights coming out, but I love this card as well, and it has played just as good as you'd think, or better if you don't think it plays that well. So we talked about the arrows, and you're probably thinking, well, Tommy, how are we going to get them into the arsenal? You keep saying that we can play stuff from hand. You keep saying that we can buff stuff. And guess what, folks? I got buffs at the wazoo. Not a ton, but enough, I think, is the most key point, because you don't want just all buffs in your hand, because the number one thing about these buffs, and you'll see it soon, is they typically block for 2. So, lower block value. And also, they're not the best in, like, you don't want a hand of all buffs, right? So, let's talk about the best one first. Premeditate, Majestic, 0 cost. All of them are going to be 0 cost. And they're all going to do one thing the same. They're going to give +3 in some way. And then they're also going to offer an on hit. Blocks 2, has go again, and costs 0. You play this from hand, you'll load something, and Premeditate says the next time an attack action card hits this turn, create a ponder token. The next attack action card you play from Arsenal this turn gains +3. So you want to get this ponder. Premeditate's the perfect card to play out a full hand. 4-card hand if you don't even have an arsenal, and you could still have an arsenal after, right? That's what the beautiful thing about ponders is. So one of the common things I like to do, and also noteworthy, this is the only pump that affects all attack action cards and not just arrows. So one thing I do like to do, though, is play this first, load an arrow from hand, and then maybe Ravenous Rabble first, present a 4 for, with go again. And then they have to say, well, do I want to give up 2 cards to make sure they don't get an arsenal? And then, maybe they do. And then you come in with whatever arrow you had placed with the Premeditate. You're coming in for 7. And that's on a 3-card hand, folks. That's great, right? So if they give up 2 cards for the Ravenous Rabble, and then they're staring down a 7 cost or 7 attack arrow, maybe has an on hit like, I don't know, perhaps a lose a life or put a -1 counter on equipment or something like that, all of a sudden, and on top of that, the ponder, they're in a rough spot. Premeditate is an all-star in this deck and will continue to be. And then I do want to talk about the next 3 in tandem. So we have Lace with Blood Rot. We have 3 of them. We have Lace with Frailty, 3 of them as well. And then Seek and Destroy, which is with 3 of them as well. So I want to talk about them in tandem because they all do the same thing, right? Cost 0, block 2, have go again. They all give your next arrow attack this turn +3, and then they have an on hit. Lace with Blood Rot is Blood Rot, obviously great token. Lace with Frailty, excellent. Seek and Destroy has, if this hits a hero at the beginning of their next end phase, they discard all cards in their arsenal and hand. So this is super inertia. Now, this is a Majestic. I'm not sure exactly how much it is right now, but if you were to say, I don't want to spend more money on this deck, Lace with Inertia is a fine replacement. It does the same thing. This is just a little bit better because it destroys the card rather than putting them on bottom. But these are the bread and butter in terms of buffing your arrows and giving like really devastating on hits, right? A lot of decks care about Frailty. Blood Rot obviously is just extra damage. And I can't think of a deck that doesn't want to have an arsenal. So Seek and Destroy or Lace with Inertia, excellent. And these cards just they fill out the deck and make these arrows so hard to deal with. All right, so now let's talk about the role fillers. These are going to be non-arrows. They are going to be cards that just like have a specific role in the deck. And the first 2 are kind of similar, right? Ravenous Rabble, I mentioned it a couple times. It is a 0 for 4, typically, go again. There's a lot of reds in this deck. And will load a card if you play it from hand, which is great, right? You can go on a 2-card hand, you can go Ravenous Rabble, load something, attack with something else, like an Endless Arrow, and all of a sudden maybe they're like, oh, god dang, now it's going to come back to my hand, I have an arsenal again. Just does a lot of things really, really well. It's the staple of most red line aggro decks, and this is no exception. And another staple in the game itself is Enlightened Strike. Now, often this will act as like a 1 for 5 go again. From hand, you can load something, but, Enlightened Strike, in my humble opinion, is one of the best cards in the game. I like Art of War has a lot of options, right? You have a lot of flexibility. You know, if you want to end the turn, like if you come in with something with Go Again, you can go at the end of turn, Enlightened Strike, draw a card so you have an arsenal. You can push extra damage with the extra 2. You can give it Go Again to extend your turn. You know, there are so many great things. The only problem is it's not a great Codex of Frailty target, but we have plenty of those. And it also blocks 3. You know, hey, listen, sometimes you just got to block in these decks, and Enlightened Strike, you know, will often feel awkward, but that's okay. Like, I think that this card smooths out the deck more than you would feel, right? It could feel awkward if you're like, man, it's like I got to give up a card to like to play this and try to like make a turn out of that. There are great lines, right? On a premeditate turn, you can go premeditate, bolt and shot from arsenal, 7 Go Again, and then you can come in with this, give up the other card from hand for 7, right? You're presenting 14 damage and then often hitting the ponder token on the premeditate turn. And Lightning Strike, super flexible. Do not sleep on this card. I know it could feel clunky sometimes, but this card is the real deal. And hey, listen, I mean, the fail safe of just having a 2-card hand and going 5 draw a card or just 7 is totally fine. Like it's been good in this game since this was printed. It will continue to be good in this game. And Lightning Strike is the best. Now let's talk about another role filler. This is a 1 for 6. Death Touch with an on hit. Can't be played from hand though. It's like an arrow, but not. It blocks for 2. That's a downside, but you know, it's a popper, which is going to come up, but like, you know, this deck is relatively weak to Dromite anyway, so you kind of have to, you can't really plan for it, but this is a great Codex of Frailty target as well. And it has flexibility as well, a lot like Enlightened Strike, right? If it hits, you get to choose Frailty, Inertia, or Blood Rot, and all 3 of those will have some use in any point of the game, right? So it's just a solid card. Riptide is one of the few decks that can really make it work, you know, outside like Azuri, I guess, and maybe Arachne. But you also got the nice thing of being able to just say premeditate, throw the Death Touch in, attack for 9. That's great. That's a you know, if let's say you trenched away something in the beginning of turn, you had premeditate in hand and the Death Touch, you have 1 resource floating, you play premeditate, Death Touch, coming for 9. You either give me 3 cards, or I get a ponder and you get something bad and I dealt damage to you, and I am set up for the next turn. Death Touch is awesome, but you know, it's not the all-star of the deck, but you are happy to present it often. Worth noting, this is not active with Dreadbore, right? You know, although it is a ranger attack, it is not an arrow. So, you know, if someone's like, you know, plays a D-React from hand, don't try to trick them, folks. It does work against Death Touch. So, which is another reason, if you think your opponent has a D-React and you Codex of Frailty, I would grab a Remorseless or an Infecting Shot instead of the Death Touch if you had the 1 resource floating to attack, because you don't want to get got by the D-Reacts unnecessarily. And speaking of Codex of Frailty, probably the most powerful card printed this past year. This card is excellent. You can block your whole hand and then Codex and still have a great turn. You can go wide into a Codex of Frailty to even like push in the extra damage, especially if your opponent doesn't have an arsenal. All of a sudden they have to get something too, and they have to discard a card, and then all of a sudden you're attacking with something from your graveyard that you grab back. Codex of Frailty, great. Lets you set up for the next turn. Gives them a Frailty, which often matters. And whatever's been said about Codex of Frailty has probably already been said, but this card is a bomb and will continue to be so. And this deck would not be anywhere near playable without it, to be honest. But it is awesome. Now we're going to get to the last 3 cards of the main deck. This is what you're presenting every single time, right? This is 54 cards total. I've just talked about before we get to the sideboard. And you're saying, well, Riptide has this whole trap ability, thing going on. What you're not playing traps? We're playing some traps main board. 3 of them. The legendary specializations: Buzzsaw Trap, Spike Pit Trap, Collapsing Trap. These are blue block 3s that are reactions at a base, right? That is the worst that they are, which is pretty good. And they also have these nice little bonuses, right? Buzzsaw Trap can bring down an attack's higher attack value back down to its base. Spike Pit Trap, if they do a reaction, you can trick them with this. They have to mill one. They lose a bunch of life. Collapsing Trap's the best card in the game ever printed, ever. You block if you trigger this on a go again, they have to discard their hand and draw that many cards on -1. These are just too good not to play. I think I would never board them out just because they are blues and they do block, right? And you don't have a lot of blues. I think we've seen 6 blues total. Yeah, 6 blues. 6 blues in the main deck. And you don't always need a blue, but it's nice to have them sometimes, right? So, especially on Codex turns, if you're like, well, geez, I want to play something from my arsenal that costs 1, you can maybe activate Dreadbore, and fail to put something in and then play the Codex and then you're off to the races. And then you get the bonus of dealing the 1 damage if you ever get them off against anyone. These 2 are the most commonly used. Most things have go again. Most decks have go again. Most decks have buffs to their attacks. And then every once in a while, you're going to get someone with a Spike Pit Trap. And like any D-React, they do have weaknesses. What are those weaknesses, Tommy? Well, Command and Conquer is a weakness. But hey, listen, as we said earlier, that we have the Crown of Providence, we do have Trench, we can trench things away, and all of a sudden everything's well in the world except if the CNC kills you. But we will try not to let that happen. Love these traps, so cool. There's a reason they're legendary, because multiples would be pretty insane. So let's get to the sideboard. So as I mentioned with the main deck is 54 cards. So you're always going to be boarding in at least 6 cards. I've found with Riptide, you will often board in more than 6 cards in a lot of matchups. There are some matchups you only board in 6 cards. So let's talk about the different cards that we have. And we talked about traps. Let's continue to talk about traps. We have here 3 Frailty Traps, 3 Tar Pit Traps. We'll talk about those in tandem. These are the Care About Go Again traps. They all cost 0. They can be played from hand. They're not the crew traps. And if they block something with Go Again, they will not only trigger 1 damage from Riptide, but they will also do an effect. The Frailty Trap gives them a Frailty. Frailty is really powerful, especially against things that are typically going again. They also usually have a weapon they want to finish off their turn or even use in tandem with their turns. I'm looking at you, Ninja. Tar Pit Traps are also good in those matchups as well, because when Tar Pit Trap defends something with Go Again, the next time an attack action card hits this turn, effects don't trigger. We want to prevent on hits, and Tar Pit Trap is an all-star when it comes to that. There's so many cool interactions that can come up. Dash.io, all of a sudden you block something with that boosted, you block the Tar Pit Trap, their boom grenades aren't going off. Your Mauvrion Sky attack is not gonna get the rune chance. Tar Pit Trap is awesome. So you bring those in against anything. I typically bring it in against anything you expect to see even a normal amount of Go Again. These come in probably the most, these 2. I would say, I will have the sideboard breakdown on the deck list that is in the description, but these come in pretty often, and can have really great impact. The next set we have here is Inertia Trap and Boulder Trap. These care about if the attack has a higher attack value than its base. Inertia Trap, a lot like Frailty, will give an inertia if it blocks something with a higher base. Boulder Trap, a lot like Drill Shot, will put a -1 counter on an equipment. So Boulder Trap, there's only 2 of them because it's less relevant throughout the whole game. But, you know, the 1 damage will be relevant late game. Inertia, it's pretty insane, right? Because sometimes people, I mean, you know this if you play Flesh and Blood, you'll play out your turn with the expectation of arsenaling 1, right? All of a sudden, if you Inertia Trap them, that's not a reality anymore. And they took 1, and you know, you're just winning because you're playing Riptide anyway. And the traps are awesome. These are all the traps we play, plus the legendary ones in the main deck. And they're all very useful. There are some matchups where you want to bring them all in. And I actually don't fault people because Ranger does get fatigued easily. So sometimes you just want a ton of cards, right? And that's okay. And as I mentioned, the Trench will help unclunk the hands with a lot of traps that you don't need and you want to save them for later. And yeah, I don't know. If you're playing Riptide, you want to play traps. That's the whole point, right? Traps are really cool. Unpreventable damage. So think about this, right? Let's say you play into Viscerai is a great example. And I like picking on Viscerai, right? You know, all my Viscerai fans out there, we love you. Viscerai, I think all of these are useful against Viscerai. And if you think about it this way, you are bordering in 3, 6, 9, 11 theoretical unblockable points of damage coming from his hero ability. That's pretty good. You're starting them at 29. That's worse than Kano. Now, this is kind of, you know, a little grandiose maybe to think like this, but why not? Right, folks? Let's think about it like that, because you want to only board in traps that are going to trigger, right? And then I mean, we didn't even count the legendary traps in there, which is another 2. I don't think Spike Pit trap really triggers on Viscerai a lot, but that would be 13 points of damage, right? So if you can go toe to toe with these decks and see a lot of these traps and play them in relevant times, which often these decks are doing something consistently, and that's the sign of a good deck, you can just get that little bit of damage in. Not even a little bit, that's a lot of damage. So that's the whole reason to play traps. Those are in the sideboard. They come in a lot of different matchups. There's some matchups you don't want any, right? Kano's one, Dromai's one, right? And that's okay. But we do have some other cool stuff here. We have some other defensive options here. Sink Below is in the board. This one comes in pretty often. Not as much as the traps, I believe, but sometimes you just have to play the Sink Below. Sink Below is just great. It's just block for 4. It does load something too, you know, if you don't have an arsenal and you need to load something. It filters the clunky hands, which is very important. It does come in a lot of matchups because guess what? Doesn't care about any kind of things going on with the attacks, whether it's go again or plus. It will cover up stuff. And it's also a nice bluff sometimes, you know, if your opponent's like, well, you know, there's no way they have more traps. I see them all in the graveyard. Well, I got Sink Below. You're blocked, sucker. But another defensive option here is Oasis Respite or Respite. I'm not sure. Let you guys decide. Put it in the comments. This is Kano tech, really, but you know, you can throw this in. I throw this into some matchups, you know. Not bad against Bravo when they're dominating stuff. Same with like Azalea, you know, you can theoretically throw that in there. Dorinthia as well. And then speaking of Bravo, and also nice thing about Oasis Respite, you start at lower life. You start at 38, so you can get that life pretty early if you really need to. And like we said, Command and Conquers are coming in against Ranger often. This is good against Command and Conquer. And then I mentioned Bravo or just like Fatigue in general. We've mentioned Remembrance a couple times. We play one, you know. Oftentimes, I think that's all you ever need. There are some like cool things you could do with it. You know, you can play it from hand and load something, you know, and just like bring back a bunch of codexes, right? The codex is the best card in the deck, so like, you know, it's not the worst to kind of bring them on back in. And then finally, to round out the rest of the sideboard here is 2 Rain Razors. You know, I used to play Razor Reflex. I found that the 1 cost ended up being a little awkward, and I felt like Rain Razors tricks a lot more people, you know, and there's a lot more that, you know, you can do. Like, you know, if you're presenting a bolt and shot, you can Rain Razors, you know, during combat, load something, then your next thing gets +2 as well. Doesn't come in, you don't want to bring these in when like you're really like I got a block or your opponents are going wide, but sometimes you know, this is a great option, especially in the matchups where you just want to go pure aggro because, you know, you can't really trap them. And I'm thinking mostly here about Dromai and Kano with Rain Razors. So then again, I mean, as I said before, I will have all the sideboard notes in the deck list below. And yeah, that's the deck. This is a lot of fun. I think it has a lot of great game into a lot of different decks. And Riptide is really fun. And I think that, you know, it's not a Ranger, right? It says Ranger, but it does not play like any Ranger you've ever played. And that's a good thing. And I do applaud the design of this. And LSS did a great time. And I've been enjoying playing it and having some success with it. Yeah, a lot of fun. So, hey, thank you all for tuning into this deck tech. You know, I hope it was very helpful. If you have any questions, I would definitely recommend joining the Buds Discord. The link is in the link tree below. And, you know, we got a great community there as well. A lot of people that love a lot of different kinds of decks and can help you. And yeah, if you have any questions personally, you can DM me on Discord as well. I'm Tommy Fresh. You can tweet at me. I'm on Twitter at FreshBudsPod or X. But most importantly, check out the podcast Fresh and Buds, which is weekly, comes out on Thursdays. Typically have guests from around the community. And depending on when this video comes out, we have Sam from 3 Floating coming out. That's a lot of fun. And yeah, other than that, thank you all. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and stay fresh and stay toasty.